He died and saved 4 soldiers. Look what they did for his daughter. When people die, they often leave others behind to grieve and deal with the loss they've suffered. Some of these dead people have left a message for their loved ones while they were still alive, or another way is found for mourners to feel close to their deceased loved ones again. These 3 stories we'd like to share with you now tell of instances where dead people have left touching messages. He died saving his comrades. His last words were to Carrie. Jacob Smith was a senior non-commissioned officer in the U.S. Army. As a child, he actually dreamed of becoming a successful businessman. But then somehow he ended up in the U.S. Navy. This seemed like a lucky break for him because, after all, it was at San Onofre Naval Base in California that he met the love of his life. Carrie was a fellow regimental officer. Soon the two were married. After 3 years, a baby was on the horizon. During the pregnancy, Carrie became ill. Doctors were at a loss. A strange infection had spread through Carrie's body and also threatened the life of the unborn child. Nevertheless, the doctors managed to stabilize the mother until the birth. The baby girl was born healthy. The weakened mother died just a few days after giving birth. Jacob was inconsolable. He mourned the loss of his wife and beloved companion, but he did not let his baby notice. He took time off and lovingly cared for his daughter. He named the child Carrie after her mother. After a few months, the officer had to return to duty, but Jacob took the best care of his little girl. She was well taken care of by a nanny or at the Navy's child care center. Jacob was deployed to Iraq. Eventually, service time came for Jacob in Iraq. His little girl would have to go without him for at least a year. Jacob explained to Carrie that her dad would have to work overseas and that the nanny would now be there for her all the time. Carrie accepted this and was already looking forward to the day when Daddy would return. A few weeks later, Sergeant Jacob Smith was already in the midst of the turmoil and madness of war. During a violent encounter, he and his men were ambushed. They were surrounded, and the enemy heavily outnumbered them. Jacob saw only one way out. He ordered his 4 men to retreat while taking heavy fire on the approaching Islamists. Jacob knew that if he didn't do that, all of his soldiers would die, so he didn't mind sacrificing his life for the lives of his men. As a non-commissioned officer and a man, that was his duty. In the middle of the battle, he was still shouting to his men, "Please, take care of my Carrie and tell her that her father loves her." The Navy took care of Carrie. A few weeks later, little Carrie was picked up from the nursery by 4 men in uniform. The 4 surviving soldiers told her what her dad had done for all of them and how brave he had been. Then they gently taught her that Jacob would not be coming back. They gave the girl her father's final greeting. Carrie wept bitterly. Now she had no mom and no dad. In the Navy, they did everything they could to make up for the loss as best they could. One of the surviving soldiers had married just before deploying to Iraq. He was grateful to be able to return to his wife, and the couple promptly adopted little Carrie. From time to time, the men of Jacob's unit spend time with Carrie and tell her about what kind of person and man her father was. They don't want the little girl to grow up without a picture or a memory of her father. Jackson's heart now beats elsewhere. Adam and Jenny Bennett of Houston, Texas, experienced something you wouldn't wish on any parent. They lost their infant son, Jackson James Bennett, in a tragic accident in 2016. Jenny was actually sure her son was asleep that day. But when Mom Jenny went to check on him, little Jackson was no longer in his crib. The horrified mother found him floating, lifeless, on the surface of the pool a short time later. Apparently, the agile little boy had run out through a doggy door into the backyard and fallen into the pool. Jackson was immediately rushed to the hospital. He fought for his life for several hours. However, his strength was no longer enough. Doctors soon determined that the boy was brain dead. Although hit hard by fate, Adam and Jenny decided something very brave. They donated little Jackson's organs. In Alaska, a heart too weak. About 6,000 kilometers further north in Alaska, a family experienced a different nightmare. James, the son of Maria Reyes and Charvela Arguedo, was born in December 2015. His heart was so weak that he was never able to leave the hospital since he was born. James had a very poor prognosis unless a donor heart could be found for him. For many months, the parents trembled and hoped. Then, one day, a call came. The doctors had a heart for James. The family had to fly immediately to Seattle, where specialists were already preparing to transplant the organ. Maria and Charvello had been praying for just this miracle, and now it was here. In an operation that lasted several hours, James from Alaska received the heart from Jackson from Houston. The families got to know each other. Many months after the surgery, when little James was doing really well, the children's families met. Sometimes people say the personalities of deceased people are transplanted with their hearts. For example, people with donor hearts have already reported memories from the donor's life, and they suddenly take on the habits of that person. So maybe a part of Jackson will live on in James too. When Jenny and her husband met the little one, the mother had a very special request. She wanted to hear Jackson's heart beat one more time. The trained nurse took a stethoscope and listened to her little boy's heart, which was now beating in another little boy. Was leaving his friend the true key to time travel? When people heard about the death of filmmaker and artist Bobby Pinn, they were shocked. The man died unexpectedly of a corona infection on April 22nd, 2020. Yet Bobby Pinn had no pre-existing medical conditions. He didn't smoke, and in his early 50s, he wasn't in the typical age group of deaths from the pandemic. His friend and colleague Josh was deeply touched. A tribute to his friend Bobby Pinn. Josh and Bobby worked together on a very special project, a time machine. Both artists were regular participants at the Burning Man Festival in the Nevada desert. This is a very special spectacle where a city of art and light installations is created in the middle of the desert for a few days. Up to 75,000 visitors attend the festivities. In the past, the highlight of the festival was the burning of a straw or wooden mannequin, the Burning Man. Since that was forbidden because of the fire danger, the artists set special highlights with ever more unusual light installations. In the absolute darkness of the desert, these lights create a mystical atmosphere. Josh and Bobby spent months building the Time Travel Elevator, an installation designed to give visitors the feeling of time travel. The documentary film honoring Bobby shows scenes from the work on the time machine. Viewers can participate in how the two friends met for the very first time. In interviews, they talked about their ideas on time travel. It is our quest that unites us. Josh says his friend Bobby used to say that the best teams never meet for superficial reasons. Groups always form out of a shared effort, passion, or problem. That, he said, is exactly what drives friends, partners, or even work colleagues forward in time. Whenever Josh got stuck with his time machine, Bobby had the solution ready. Once he even had a friend fly in especially to help with a few technical details free of charge. Finally, the artist worked on the creative idea of what the key to time, or the appropriate key for their time machine, should look like. This was one of the last works the two friends did together. The Burning Man Festival 2019 was to be the last for the time being. Time had once again changed everything. In 2020, like so many others, the country was hit by the corona pandemic. Festivities like Burning Man have been impossible ever since, and Bobby is no longer alive. Shortly after his death, Josh found a message from his friend that he will never forget. It was one of the keys to the time machine, plus a note from Bobby that said, "We are all time travelers, heading toward the future. Each of us should make sure for ourselves that this is a future we all want to experience." Touching, isn't it? Especially when people leave us, we pay much more attention again to what message they actually had for us. What did our relationships mean, and what did they leave behind in the world? That question we should all deal with at times, even during our lifetime. How did you like this story? Write us your thoughts in the comments. I'm curious.